well, it's the top of the hour here, so I'm sure it must be the top of the hour there too. So let's go ahead and get started. And welcome. This is a conversation today about the 5W's of scaling advisory services. So success today looks like Ryan and I are going to be walking through the who, what, when, where, why, and of course the how of advisory services, and specifically scaling those advisory services. As you can see in our agenda here today, we will allow for time for Q&A, and we'll allot for that time at the end of our conversation. So use the Q&A anytime to pop in your questions. We're going to take those questions in order and get through as many of them as we can. So anytime you've got a question, go ahead and pop it in there, and we'll definitely try to get to that at the end of our talk. Now, this is where I said I'm going to ask you a question. Go ahead and in the ideas piece or in the chat portion of that small window, we want to hear your name, where you're tuning in from, and just for the fun of it, now that we've been talking about nice warm weather, what is your favorite summer beverage? So your name, where you're from, and your favorite summer beverage. Go ahead and pop that in there. And we've got a few of our folks from FreshBooks on with us today to help watch that chat and those Q&A and to kind of be watching anything that's coming through there. One last thing is this session is going to be recorded, and will receive a copy of this recording in the next 24 to 48 hours. All right, so I'm Twyla. I live in Calgary, Alberta with my husband and our 13-year-old daughter. I enjoy running and yoga and traveling and spending time in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. That's a picture in my background that I took myself on a hike. Love the mountains. I find the mountains to be extremely grounding and somewhere that's literally a 45-minute drive from my home. I'm a CPA, I'm a former firm owner, I'm also a co-founder of a fintech startup, and my advisory experience is really from within our accounting firm, where our firm led with advisory services. Right now, my prominent role is head of the accountant channel here at FreshBooks, which means that I also lead the brand new accounting partner program here. And if I share my summer drink of choice, if I'm going to stay on the good side, I'd say, and non-alcoholic, it would be good old-fashioned lemonade on a hot day. I find that really my go-to. If I'm going to talk cocktail, then I'll have to say an Aperol Spritz.
Oh, nice one. That's a great summer drink.
It is. Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you, but before I do, I just want to say thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here today, and my name is Ryan Lazanis. I'm a CPA, born and raised here in Montreal. Go Habs, if there's any Montrealers on this webinar. So I live here with my wife. We have a daughter who is turning 1 in 2 days. So we're looking forward to her first birthday. And I started an accounting firm called Zen Accounting in 2013. It was an online accounting firm. Started from scratch, ended up selling it in 2018 to a large corporate services firm based out of Europe. And ended up starting Future Firm, which is my current business, to help other accountants fast track the growth of a modern, scalable firm that they really love working in. Been doing one-to-one coaching for the last couple of years. I send a weekly, I have a lot of free content, a blog, podcast, weekly newsletter, all designed to provide actionable content to people that want to scale a firm. I have an online coaching membership called Future Firm Accelerate. And when I started my firm, it was actually focused as an advisory firm only. Ran into a few issues with that and learned some things the hard way about advisory services, which hopefully I'll be able to share with you a little bit later on in this presentation. Yeah, what I'm currently busy with right now is serving my members in Future Firm Accelerate, making sure that they get help scaling a modern firm. And my summer drink of choice if we're going to talk alcoholic beverages here, last year it was a Negroni. Not sure what it's going to be this summer, but I might have to agree with Phil in the comments who said craft beer. I'm really into that at the moment. So I'm going to go with that this summer.
That's a good choice. And I was gonna peg you as a beer guy, and I was almost testing my own my own spidey senses. And so I
I
guess
haven't
I guess
always
I
been,
called it.
but I've gotten
No?
into it recently. Yeah.
You turned into a dad, so you got to start drinking
There you
beer.
go.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Ryan. I wanted to just share this before we kind of kick into the real content and the real meat of our conversation today. The reality is, we all know that advisory is a big part of the conversations we have right now. It's a big part of the dialogue around, should you get into advisories? If you do, what does that look like? And very importantly, how do you do that? And just something here that we pulled from CPA Practice Advisory, which is being able to offer expert insights when it comes to finances will give firms the upper hand. So let's go ahead and kick off our first poll. We've got 2 polls today. Ryan and I would really like to just know a little bit more about you and what you are currently doing for advisory services. So if we can launch the poll, if we haven't already, that would be great. The question is, are you currently offering advisory service to your clients? With the options being yes, the clients are paying for the services. Yes, but the clients aren't paying for the services. I don't know about you, Ryan, but something that I definitely have heard is that we're giving away those services for free, and that we're looking to understand how to start charging for them. And then the simple answer, number 3, of not yet. So we'll give you just a moment to respond to that question.
And I haven't just heard of that. I've actually lived through that, of not knowing how to price advisory services and offer the service. And in the early days, was providing those services at for nothing, for free, basically. So I think that's something we'll probably get into a little bit later in the presentation as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's something that I'm hearing a lot of people have experienced over the past year and a half, where you kind of had to flip into this advisory role because your clients needed you in a different engagement, or in offering different services inside of this past year and a half. And we did it from a place of, gosh, I want to help my clients. I mean, that's ultimately why we are in the work that we're in when we're running a firm, is because we want to help people. And so of course a lot of people did respond to that help and didn't necessarily take the time to adjust engagements and figure out pricing and do all those things. And now they're in a spot of, okay, it's time to stop doing that and start to actually charge for these services.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the comments here that the poll is not in Zoom, but I see some people commenting with number 1, so I'm going to
With their
assume
answers.
that's
Okay. Yeah, that
yeah.
poll is sitting in Slido, which is kind of off to the right, if depending on how that's getting pulled up on what people are seeing. So great workaround. Just go ahead and pop it in the chat if you're not able to see the poll. All right, let's end it there. Oh, I just see somebody else answered, so I don't want to cut people off too quickly. But all right, let's end the poll there and see where we end up. And I'm not seeing the results. I don't know if you see them, Ryan, but
I'm not seeing those results come through.
Okay. No
but
problem.
assuming we follow what's on Zoom, everyone says number 1. So
all right. So that's good. That's good that's where we're at, because it means we can focus today a lot of our conversation on scaling it, because potentially they're already doing it and the clients are paying for it, but we're looking to do more of it. So
perfect. 75% said gave number 1. So I think you're right on that one.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. All right, so let's get into our 5 W's, and we'll start with what is advisory? Now, if there's 75% of us that are doing it, I think we probably already know this, but I think it's also good to just make sure that we're all on the same page around what exactly are we talking about when we talk about advisory. So what is the definition of advisory, or what is advisory? Ryan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and what advisory means to you.
So my definition is quite simple, actually, and I think everyone has a different idea of what advisory is, and we often hear about um, we offer compliance services, we offer advisory services, but no one's actually taking the time to um, define what that means. And I think Twyla, you've had some articles in the past that have kind of spoken a little bit about that. So I'll be curious to hear what you have to say about it. But for me, it really just comes down to any service that you're providing that's providing advice to your clients. And that could be forward looking, that could be analytical, that could be backwards looking. But really, anytime that you're providing any kind of advice, that would be an advisory service compared to like a compliance service where you're engaged in bookkeeping, you're engaged in tax returns, you're engaged in financial statements, and you're just producing the work and not really advising or analyzing any of that work. So my definition is any service where you're just providing advice to clients.
Excellent. I think that makes perfect sense. And that seems easy to wrap our heads around, because I know that sometimes the hesitation in the starting point, or the hesitation in pricing it and charging for it, is that we aren't clear on what it is to even know how to put it into the engagement and actually then charge for it. And so I really like your definition. The couple of articles that I've written, one was from a few years ago now, where I believe I titled it "What the Heck is Advisory,"
Yeah,
which was
that
basically
was a
just
great
saying,
article, by the way.
thank you. Yeah, I think you actually shared that in
I
that
put that in my
newsletters of
newsletter.
yours. And it was basically saying that it isn't defined, and to use that lack of definition to your advantage to create an advisory service or advisory services that are going to be helpful to your client, and that your skill set matches to that. And so that was my thinking on it a couple years ago. Recently, I posted a new article where it was called "What are advisor services?" or "What are accounting advisory services?" And I did give it a bit more definition than I had in the past, but basically it was anything beyond compliance. So you mentioned compliance in your definition, and so it was anything beyond that compliance that that was not not something that you can necessarily put as a deliverable, and that you can necessarily quantify at the same way that you can your compliance work, but that it was anything above that compliance work, above what I almost call as the necessary evil, that necessary work that every business owner needs, anything beyond that. Great. All right, so we're all on the same page about what the heck is advisory, and let's go into why should I offer it. Again, if we've got most people on this call who are saying, I'm already offering it, but this could still be a reinforcement as to why you should continue to offer it, or why you should offer more of it. So would love to hear your thoughts here, Ryan, around, what was your why when you started your firm, and started with specifically advisory, and even others now that you're working with. What do you share with them as to like, why should I do this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think probably a lot of people on this call are offering it, but maybe not to the extent that they would like to offer it, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why they might be joining us today. But I think there's a few reasons. When I started my firm, I actually started primarily as a virtual CFO firm, and all my packages included a whole host of advisory services. I didn't even really know what advisory services were at the time. I just figured I wanted to help clients and businesses and people look forward. That's what I felt people really, really wanted. And that's why I started it as like more of a virtual CFO firm. There's a few things I learned along the way, but really I wanted to help people look forward. And I really felt that's what clients were looking for from their accountants. And I felt that would be a good differentiation factor, because most firms just do the compliance work, And that's really backwards looking type stuff. So that's why I kind of set out to be more of that virtual CFO, more of that advisory firm from the get-go. There's a couple other things that I realized along the way that as reasons for why I think people should offer advisory and to offer more advisory in their firm. I think one of the important things from a firm perspective is that, we have here on the slide client stickiness. And the more services that we surround our clients with, the harder it is for them to leave. So, if we do all the compliance work plus all the advisory, it just makes it harder to transition to another firm. So the client stickiness is something that I really like about not just advisory, but just offering more services and surround the client with more and more services. That said, the nature of advisory is getting to know the client, getting to know the situation, getting to know the business, and that deepens the relationship. And that kind of also leads into the client stickiness point as well. The more you know your client, the harder it is for them to leave. If you know your client really, really well, it takes time to build up that relationship. And there's no shortcut to that, right? If you know your client for, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and you've built a very deep relationship, it's very hard to transition away. And the deeper you know your client, the more of an impact you can have on their business. We have another point here, easier scaling. There was a survey done which showed, the average revenue made per client. And on a compliance client, it's about $4,000 a year. On a client where you're offering advisory services, the average client size is about $6,500 to $8,000 in revenue a year. So that's a significant jump in the amount of money that you can bring into your firm. So that just makes it easier to scale. We know that, marketing is not always easy for a lot of firms. Bringing in new clients is not easy. So upselling existing clients makes scaling a little bit easier. The nature of this kind of work, it often leads to higher margins compared to compliance services. And I think the main point here, the one I like the best, is clients are looking for more. And what I'd say there is there's a high demand for this kind of service. Like if you look at all the surveys out there for small businesses, what they're looking for from their accountant, especially during the pandemic, it's been very, very tough times over the last, I'm losing track at how long this coronavirus has been lasting for, but it's at least a year now. And, the demand is there. They need help managing their cash. They need help managing their business, managing their growth. And clients aren't receiving this from most accountants. So the demand exists. And that's where I like to play. We don't want to jam things down people's throats. We want to make it easy. If we want to sell something, the demand has to be there. So these are some of the reasons why I think offering advisory makes a lot of sense at a firm.
Thanks, Ryan. I think the couple of things that I want to add there, just with some of our experience with our advisory firm, was you called it out, the stickiness and the deepen the client relationships. And from my experience, there's still more business owners who have not experienced advisory than that have. And so as a result, when you start to offer advisory services to your clients, they actually think those services don't exist anywhere else. And so that stickiness just becomes really organic in that they haven't had this experience before. They haven't had this level of relationship with their accounting professional before. And speaking from somebody who came out of the firm, and we had some clients that we ended up I'll call it rehoming. It was actually difficult to get rid of them because they really felt like they would never get advisory anywhere else. And to be clear, they don't call it advisory. They just know what they know from the relationship, but it did naturally create that same stickiness. And then the second thing I wanted to share is that when you talked about scaling, we leaned heavily on our existing clients being the source of new clients. And in fact, we would actually ask our clients who referred other clients to us, what did you tell them? Because we're trying to figure out our marketing, because marketing advisory, when people don't know what advisory is and haven't experienced advisory, is really tricky to do. And so when we asked our clients, well, what is it that you said to them to get those other clients or get that lead to us? They actually said, I don't really know what you do. I just know that my business wouldn't survive without you.
Mm-hmm.
And that became our number one marketing resource, and our number one marketing tool was having our existing clients talk to their small business owner friends and refer new business to us. And that's how we scaled the business, because we found marketing it to be really difficult.
And when you were marketing it, you weren't calling it advisory services though, were you? Yeah.
No, we weren't, but we played a lot with what is the right verbiage. And
Yeah.
now that I'm at FreshBooks, I'm seeing this really prominently around business owners not understanding
Yeah.
what advisory is, and that,
Yeah.
our industry has gone on this journey around advisory and all these things that we
Yeah.
can do, and business owners haven't kept up with that journey. And so yeah, that they won't ever say, I would really like you to start
Yeah.
doing advisory services. Similar to, I have a lot of cash flow experience, and clients do not ever say, what would be really helpful is if you created a cash flow statement and
Yeah.
provided me with a projection. That's not what they say. You have to be in that deeper relationship and have those conversations, like you said before, and get to know your client to start to pick up on what is it that they really need and will put value on.
And I don't want to go too off tangent here, but just a quick point on that, because I think the reason I asked that is because I think when you look at a lot of firm websites, the services they're offered, they're advertising advisory, and that's not what the client thinks of. That's not what they
Mm-hmm.
want to buy, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, how can you help me grow? How can you help me manage my cash? They're not saying they're not going out and saying, I want to buy advisory services today. So there's often a mismatch between how that's being marketed and what the client is looking for.
Yeah, yeah. And if I layer onto that, because now we are getting off on a tangent, but is it, not only do they not think that like they don't understand it and don't think that they need it, they also instantly go to that super expensive.
Yeah,
But
that's
as you
true.
talked about $8,000 being the average annual revenue from an advisory client, when you do the math backwards, that's still very affordable for most businesses to get the level of expertise and relationship for that $8,000 or so a year.
I say we just scrap the rest of the slides and just go off on a complete tangent the rest.
Well, the reason I asked you, Ryan, to join me on this conversation is because I know that advisory is something that you could talk about for hours, and so we definitely will stick with our slides. But
All right, let's go
probably
for it.
could go there. All right, so the next W that we want to cover is which ones, which types of advisory should I offer? Or let's maybe even start with just sharing, what are the different types of advisory, Ryan, that you're familiar with, whether it was in your firm or from working with other of your clients now?
Yeah, so there's a few that I listed here, and I had an article also on accounting advisory services that I posted probably a couple months back, which was really focused on, like, the approach that I like to take whenever I'm going through any coaching or when I was running my firm is, how can we make the business run like an engine? And when people think about advisory, they often think of a service that might be disruptive to the model, because the bookkeeping can flow in and out. We know the tax return process, but the advisory work, a lot of people think about it as like project-based work. So the services that I like are the ones that we can make into something more repeatable. And there's a couple ones listed in my article. I go into some details about each of the services listed here, but generally speaking, when people are thinking about advisory, they're thinking about budgeting, they're thinking about cash flow, they're thinking about KPI dashboarding, stuff like that. What I've added here is, or what we're discussing here is, health checkups. Could be a health checkup call, could be a health checkup report. It's basically just formalizing giving advice throughout the year, and analyzing results. It's nothing complicated. It's just formalizing that into a service. So instead of giving ad hoc advice here and there, it's say, hey, we give you a quarterly health checkup meeting and we go over your results with you. We analyze what's going on. We understand where the business is heading and we give some suggestions based on that. So it's a very, very simple service. Cash flow forecasting and budgeting is probably my favorite advisory service to scale because it involves implementing a model upfront, which is kind of project based, but then maintaining that model on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, an annual basis. That's extremely scalable because once the model is in place, all you need to do is collect information about what new assumptions with the business on an ongoing basis and update the model or update the budgets versus actual. So that's an extremely scalable service that anyone in the firm could basically take over. It doesn't need to be the partner or the firm owner handling that. Coaching is something that I wish I probably would have been offering at my firm. And I only started understanding this with Future Firm, where what we're trying to do with coaching is understand where someone is now and where they specifically want to end up. That's the gap, and helping them close that gap. And there's doesn't have to be any huge deliverables attached with this. It's not disruptive to the business model. It just means that we have to understand how to assess that gap, and then help the client, help provide actionable, practical advice to help them close that gap. There's a really great app called Clarity, which provides that kind of coaching format where it assesses where certain 7 key KPIs where the client is at right now. It helps analyze where the client wants to end up with those KPIs, and then we can develop an action plan directly with the app, within the app. So that's a cool app for anyone that wants to get into coaching. And then courses, online courses. The online education space is really booming. And this is something that you're seeing only a few firms get into, really forward-thinking firms getting into a course type model or a membership type model, where instead of teaching the same thing over and over to clients, instead of teaching them maybe how to create a budget or how to read financial statements or how to analyze things, you could put that into an online course format. And I know some firms that are charging $1,500 for this, and they're looking to sell a couple hundred of these a year. That's a nice chunk of change, and it's a highly scalable form of advisory services where you can service one to many very, very easily. It does take a little bit of time to put those courses into place, but once they're there, the revenue stream is quite passive. So yeah, these are a few things that I like in terms of advisory services and what I'm seeing certain firms offer.
I love these ones that you've shared because some of them are maybe a little bit, I'll call it outside the box, and versus some of them are pretty evergreen in terms of cash flow forecasting and budgeting. And I know for certain, Ryan, that was your and I first conversation when we first met at a conference a few years ago, was talking around cash flow and how important that can be and how sticky that can make a client to be doing cash flow. But this is a nice variety of some real core services that, like you said, are scalable. I think it's really important that we all can agree that advisory services are broad and that you can make them your own. And these are some really great suggestions and some unique ones here too. And some of the other kind of unique ones that I'm hearing about are things like even offering an accounts receivable advisory or accounts receivable services and leading with a client engagement with those services and then building on from there. And another one that has really established itself and expanded recently is around people advisory and doing more payroll and HR. And Gusto is really leading the charge in the US with creating this people advisory certification and this entirely new service offering that you can give to clients around all things payroll, HR benefits, and those sorts of things that are still high pain points for business owners. So I think that it's going to continue to be incredibly broad, and as accountants get more and more creative with their service offering, I think we'll continue to see this expand. All right, let's dive into who. And I think that this is always a kind of a question that I hear about, which is who, like who should I offer advisory services? Which clients should I offer advisory services to? And it can start even at the very top of like new clients versus existing clients. And then it can go further from there around if you're starting to look at your existing clients, who within your existing clients can you offer advisory services to, or are a great option to start to do more advisory services. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, Ryan, if someone comes to you and says, who do I do this with?
Yeah, I think it might depend a little bit on where firms are at in their life cycle of offering advisory services and how experienced they are. If someone's just looking to dip their toe in, that might change from a firm that's been offering it for the last few years. I think universally, though, where we would want to focus first is probably the clients that need it. Well, maybe not need it the most, but we want the the easier sell, let's just say, would be the clients that are in growth mode, because they need help managing growth. They need help, taking things to the next level. They have the resources to pay for that kind of service, generally speaking. So the clients in growth mode, and for me, it would always be an easy one. It would always be an easy target for an upsell. Those are the ones that, like I said, will be able to pay for that kind of service. Obviously, there's clients that, have cash flow difficulties. They need that help as well. They might not always be able to pay for it. So maybe we want to find an alternative way to service those kind of clients. That's why the online course model that I mentioned previously in the previous slide could fit well with those kind of clients, because that would be much more affordable. So I guess those are a few thoughts about who you should offer advisory for. I don't know if anything else comes to mind for you, Twyla.
Yeah, no, I think this is, like I said, a universal great place to start. And I think always something I always commonly hear is, I don't know how to sell, that accountants are feeling apprehensive about selling and marketing their services. And if you go to the ones that kind of fit these, like the growth mode, or that that they really could use it, then the sell job isn't as difficult versus the ones who they feel like they're doing just fine. And those ones are a trickier sell too, because they aren't, ambitious about their growth, or they aren't struggling with some cash flow, or kind of sitting in this weird spot of like, oh, it's feeling uncomfortable being a business owner and trying to navigate. If they feel like they've got it figured out, then those are a tougher one to sell to.
Yeah, like accountants are obviously don't like selling, and I certainly fit into that bucket. I'm highly introverted. I'm actually a very, very shy person, and selling for me is not always comfortable. And the way I look at it is, sales for me is just how you could help improve, understanding how you can help improve someone's situation. And if you can understand how you can help improve someone's situation and communicate that, you're not, I mean, you can call that selling, but really, uh, for me, that's all what it comes down to is, finding out how we can help improve someone's situation and attaching a price to that. That's what selling comes down to for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes perfect sense, because if we go back to, again, thinking about how come a lot of accounting professionals got into the profession was to help people. So if you can bring it down to its core, like you just did, then it can feel more comfortable to, I don't even like to use the word sell, but to like
Yeah.
present the the services to the client, right? Yeah, good call. All right, so let's move on to where, and this is basically coming down to where the heck do I start? And again, we've got people on the call who have already been doing advisory, but this still could give you some ideas around where do I start with the next one, or where do I start to continue? And for those of you who aren't necessarily doing it yet, this can be a great, this is kind of the where is that starting point? So when somebody asks you that question, Ryan, where do I start? What's your response to them?
With anything I ever do in business, it's always start simple. Like that's my answer for everything. So if you're just getting into advisory services, we have some, like, start with one client, start with a low maintenance client, start with a client that might be in growth mode, and start with one kind of advisory service. Don't try to put like 10 different kinds of advisory services into the package. Start with one. The one I like the most, just to dip your toe in, is health checkup calls. It's very, very simple. There's very little preparation required. The only deliverable really is jumping on a call at a predetermined time. You could just schedule a court. You can, in your plan, your subscription plan. If you're, we'll get into how to price advisory services. I always like monthly recurring price, a package of services for one monthly price, and just sticking in quarterly health checkup call. Jump on a call once a quarter, analyze the financials before the call, come to the call with a few talking points, understand where the business is heading, and that's it. It's a 1 hour deliverable once a quarter. So that's where I really like, and I like to include that for all clients, actually, some level of health checkup call for all clients, because you're formalizing advisory and you're removing the ad hoc stuff. No matter where you are, if you're just dipping your toe in, or if you're been offering advisory services, I recommend health checkup calls for all clients, for all firms.
Yeah.
Uh, if you're a little bit more advanced, I mean, you've already started already. So then I would talk about how could you further productize, or how can you productize your advisory services? That might be a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think the philosophy though of even starting with one and then starting with your next one and then your
Mm-hmm.
next one, you learn so much inside of those first few that you do
Yep.
advisory with, that even though your clients are a little bit different and they're all a little bit unique, you start to understand what works. Like you said, with the health checkup calls, that was something that probably universally worked for all of your clients, and you can start to then build onto that. So then you create the process of what does my health checkup look like, and it still comes down to start with one and then scale up from there.
Agreed.
Great. So let's move on to the next W, which is when. When do I do this? And gosh, in the past year and a half, everything's probably been a question of when we've been dealing with a lot and all these changes with PPP and wage subsidies and all these other programs from the government, and kind of being reactive, probably more so than we might want to. But I think now it's still a good time to ask this question at this point, especially as we are starting to see things open up and protocols changing. When can I fit this into my firm? How do I actually find the time?
Yeah. So maybe I'll touch on the last bullet, and maybe I'd like to get your take on some of the other points here. But I think, at least for me, my approach to this was, certainly I always, when I was running a firm, it was growing, it's fast paced, and we're trying to avoid the amount of disruption that happens in the firm, in the business. And going back to what I was saying earlier, a lot of these advisory services, we get a lot of firm owners get the feeling that this could be too disruptive to the business model. And let's just do more of what we know best, which is tax returns, bookkeeping, financial statements, like the core compliance services. So my approach was, I don't want the firm to be disruptive. I don't want ad hoc or project work coming in through the door. I need to find a way to fit this into the workflow and to maintain my capacity and the team's capacity. And in order to do that, there has to be a kind of formula involved, and a formula involved to deliver advisory work and to make it as repeatable as possible. So I would actually not offer advisory work personally at my firm unless it was something repeatable, unless it's something I can get into the process, into a routine, and then it's delegated amongst other team members, essentially. Because a lot of advisory services, it takes a certain level of talent and experience as well, and not everyone on the team can do it. And a lot of times that would fall onto the partner or owner's shoulders. So by making it repeatable, by having a process, by having a routine in place, you can spread out the work throughout the year. You can forecast when the work needs to be delivered. You can more easily fit into your capacity. And it's something in my opinion, that's not disruptive and much more scalable than the ad hoc advisory work and the once-off advisory work. So that comes into, as I mentioned earlier, with like cash flow forecasts and budgets. Don't just do it once, implement the model, and then have a monthly service or a monthly price to maintain that model on an ongoing basis, whether it be quarterly budget versus actual analysis, quarterly updates to the budget, semi-annual updates to cash flow projections. You could play around with the frequencies of those deliverables. But for me, the big thing is, if you want to fit into the firm, if you want to maintain the capacity, you have to have a repeatable offering. So that would be my comment when it comes to when can I fit this into the firm, is focus on making it repeatable, and you'll be able to spread it out and foresee when the deliverables need to be managed.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's really great advice, to be mindful of not doing work that isn't repeatable. And so sometimes when we're trying to start to do more advisory, you might be open to, can you just create this financial forecast that I need to be able to give to my bank to get more financing, and or I'm needing to get investors now, or whatever that looks like, and it's not a long-term commitment and a monthly engagement or something that is repeatable. And it goes back to kind of what we said earlier when we were talking about the reasons to do advisory. One of them was managing workflows. So if you then kind of blow that up yourself with doing advisory that isn't repeatable and ongoing, then it will be more difficult to scale for sure. And I think the other thing here, we've kind of outlined a few things, that we don't need to necessarily go into every one, but one that's always important to me is technology. We could not have done the advisory work that we did for the number of clients that we did without adequate use of technology. You talked about Clarity for coaching, all these different tools that we've got now at our fingertips, even inside of the accounting software itself. Like, how do you best utilize that to do advisory services and to start to scale those services? It can become really tedious to create financial models and do things in Excel and try to scale that, and how do you charge for it? And that technology and those workflows certainly helps with finding the time to be able to do this, as does it, kind of looking at things like niching, because then can you take that same tech and keep applying that same tech, or do you end up doing some advisory for firms for clients that sort of technology doesn't work for them? So it all kind of fits in together in order to be able to scale it. All right, let's kick off our next poll. And I appreciate that you might have to answer this on chat if you don't have the other window open with Slido. But before we get into the how of our conversation, let's do a quick poll on what's the biggest challenge you're currently facing with advisory. So not enough time, not sure how to deliver it, unclear on how to price it. We talked about that earlier and how that's a challenge. Number 4 is all of the above, or number 5 is I'm doing great with this. I'm selling advisory services without challenge.
Curious to see the results on this one.
Yeah, me too.
We have Edel that asked a question about how to manage to make ad hoc requests repeatable. I'm not sure if we should get to that. We should kind of answer that in the next slide, or should we wait for the Q&A on that one?
Yeah, I see that one there too. And thanks, Atal, for that question. And I'll keep my window open here and we will make sure that we circle back on that one for sure.
Cool.
All right. Have we been able to launch the poll? I think so. Okay. Let's see if we can get the results. All right. 42%. It looks like 42% of our followers are saying, or our listeners are saying they're unclear of how to price. And so it sounds like maybe there's a follow-up, a follow-up to this, Ryan, and talk about price, because I know you and I have had some conversations around that.
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, actually.
All right, so let's go into the how. This is the nuts and bolts of this, and I don't know about you, Ryan, but one of the number one question that I get asked is, okay, yes, I get all that, but how? How do I do it? And I would love to kind of dive into a couple of these points here. And we've got 3 slides dedicated to how.
So I don't think there's any huge, I wish I had like a big secret here, but it really comes down to having a process in place to deliver it. And obviously that's going to differ, whether it's a cash flow forecast, whether it's a budget, whether it's a health checkup call. But we just need to understand first the result that we want to deliver with this particular advisory service, and take a little bit of time to write down what that process looks like to get to that result. And the way I like to do it is, if I'm doing a health checkup call, for instance, there's a process for a health checkup call. For me personally, there's a framework for the health checkup call, which involves, step 1, make sure the books are up to date. Step 2, analyze the P&L and balance sheet and, look for this, and this. Step 3, write down a few suggestions or talking points to bring up on a call. Like, there's a process to follow to deliver a health checkup call. And it comes down to actually running through that service a couple times, honing in on that process, documenting it, and then that process can then be delegated elsewhere in the team. So I'm not sure if that's helpful or not. I wish I had something more concrete, but we have to take time to think about what that ideal process looks like to provide the ideal result to your client in terms of that particular deliverable, and then document it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And Atal, I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether or not that answers the question about how to manage making an ad hoc request repeatable, which could be that documenting it and seeing as there's something more to be able to do that ongoing.
And the one thing I would say there is not all ad hoc requests can be repeatable. There are certain ad hoc requests. When a client has a need, I think it's your duty to answer that need, provided it's within your competency. So yeah, there's been certain times where, we'd have to take on a project that was tough on our capacity, and it was a one-time thing that they needed help with. But I guess what I'm saying is, if someone just comes to you and says, I want a financial model, or I want a budget, like, I wouldn't just do that once. I would explain why you would want to have that on an ongoing basis rather than once. So I'd explain the benefits of, like, yeah, we could put this in place now, but in a couple months from now, it'll be outdated, and your business is growing, and we need to help you manage your growth. And that's why you need an ongoing budget with us, right? So some requests are just once off, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can't force someone to take something repeatable. But a lot of times we can turn a once-off task into something, or a once-off project into something repeatable.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So we do touch briefly on pricing and more so on how we charge for it as opposed to pricing. So how, when somebody asks you, but okay, Ryan, that all makes sense, but how do I charge for it? What's your go-to?
My go-to is value pricing, which is very difficult, is the most difficult pricing methodology to learn, in my opinion. And actually, you might reference this, but the first thing I ever read about getting away from hourly billing was Mike McDermott's book on breaking the time barrier. And, that was the very first time that I was introduced to a different kind of pricing model. And then I read more deeply into it, read Ron Baker's Implementing Value Pricing. But for me, um, value pricing is a good way to obtain the highest price possible with the highest margin possible, but it's more of an art than a science, which a lot of accountants don't really like. They like to follow a formula, which is where fixed pricing is a little bit easier. And I think fixed pricing can work well with, a repeatable service. So my approach is I like fixed pricing or value pricing, but I usually lean towards value pricing.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was just recently listened to an older version of the cloud, or an older edition episode of the Cloud Accounting podcast, and Blake was kind of giving his formula per se of how he created his fixed fee monthly pricing. And so I love Blake. I think he's really intelligent, but I think that that's one of the times, like you said, that accountants love their formulas. And you could tell that he shared how he came up with his fixed fee pricing, but then also when challenged by David, then said that, but in some cases, then when he felt there was more value than what the formula came out to, that then he would add on to that and put a premium on, and that's where that value-based pricing starts to feel really uncomfortable for us accounting personalities. But I agree with you 100%. And thanks for sharing about Mike's book. Mike's book, Breaking the Time Barrier, Shannon from my team here has put that into the chat. And it really was ahead of its time in terms of having conversations around getting out of hourly billing.
Yeah.
So we shared that with you there. And then the last how is really what we were all here for, is how do I make it scalable and repeatable? And Ryan, you've already given us some golden nuggets in terms of how to create a repeatable, scalable advisory service offering. But I know that you've got a story that that you wanted to share inside of this part of our talk today. So I'll let you do that.
Yeah. So I elaborate on all these points in an article that I wrote. This was probably about 6 months ago. 4 tips to boost revenues with repeatable advisory work. And as I mentioned earlier, when I started my firm, it was advisory only, tax work, like year-end work, plus virtual CFO services in all packages. And had a bunch of clients on this packages to start off. And what I realized was, let's say there was a quarterly budget included in a client's package. It would be such a battle a lot of times to actually deliver the budget on time, because the books were in such terrible condition. Because as a firm, we didn't want to handle bookkeeping at the outset. We didn't want to touch bookkeeping. We said, this is not the kind of firm we want to be. We want to just be a virtual CFO firm. And it was such a battle to deliver the advisory service. And a lot of times the advisory services were being delivered late, or on data that wasn't accurate. And an advisory service just falls apart. Especially a repeatable advisory service just falls apart if you don't have timely, accurate data. If you have all clients and they manage their own bookkeeping and it's A+ accurate data and it's always on time, then you're set. But if that's not the case, which I wager it is, then you cannot have a scalable advisory service. So the key is the bookkeeping. And very early on in the firm, we said, if we're going to offer any advisory service, and in fact, if we're going to work with any client at all, we have to mandate bookkeeping. So within 6 months of starting the firm, bookkeeping was mandated across the board, across the entire client base, and any client signing up with us needed to get bookkeeping with us because we would control the timeliness and accuracy of the data. And with that, we would be able to offer a repeatable advisory service because we were in control. So that's probably one of my number one tips is if you're going to offer a scalable advisory service, make sure you have timely, accurate data. You probably can't rely on your clients. So you need some way to either handle it in-house or offshored or outsourced or whatever it is, but you need good data to make this work. The other thing is to productize what you already do. And what I mean by that is a lot of accountants are giving ad hoc advice and they're not charging for it. And there's a lot of value to that advice. So you can formalize it into a health checkup call, what we already talked about. Again, this was something that Etel asked about, once-off mandates. Make them into something repeatable whenever possible. Because if you're just doing once-off work all the time, then you can't scale once-off work. You need a routine, you need a process around it. And the last thing I'll say about scaling advisory services, it's a lot easier to do when you actually have something I call a re-engagement process. So if you're charging a fixed monthly price, don't just let that recur into perpetuity. Meet with the client once a year before the engagement completes. See where they're heading with their business and see what else they need help with and see what else you can do to help improve their situation. In other words, sales. But that becomes your upsell at that point. And that's a very easy way to bump clients up onto a higher price plan. So these are a few points that I would suggest if you want to look at making your advisory services scalable and repeatable.
That all makes perfect sense. And I think just to layer on that last one with their engagements, I think that's also a good time to do your own kind of looking backwards, thinking, did I do some, or did my team do some advisory services that we gave away for free? And that now you can at least start to charge for those? Or did you dip your toe into a few that kind of showcase that there's an opportunity there? So you kind of can do it as a bit of a backwards audit. What did we do for this client?
Yeah. Whether you're in
make
scope
sure
or out of scope.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, thanks for that, Ryan. And we've got a bit of time here for Q&A. Only a few minutes left, but I've been trying to watch on the different spots. But if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and pop them either into the Q&A or the chat right now. Looking back here to make sure I didn't miss any from prior parts of our conversation. I'm not seeing any. Looking at the Q&A, don't see anything there. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in. If not, then we'll flip over to the last slide here, but I'll just give everyone a few moments, see if anyone gets brave.
There is one question in the Slido. What is the link for Clarity?
Oh, it's I think it's Clarity HQ. Let's see, Clarity HQ, clarity-hq.com. Systematized business advisory solution.
Yeah, that's a great tool and built by people from the accounting profession. So that's always something that might be interesting to know, is that it's built by somebody who was working with clients and saw the pain point and the need. We do have a question here in the chat I'm seeing, Ryan. It's, how do you scale specialty services? For example, financial forensic, fraud examination, business intelligence.
That's a good question. I wish I had in-depth knowledge on all of those services, but unfortunately, I don't. And I'd have to understand the nature. I mean, business intelligence seems like something that you would be able to offer on an ongoing basis, yeah, you know what? I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer just because I don't really understand the nature of some of those services.
Sounds like an area to even explore some of the other types of offerings that you mentioned in terms of the types of advisory. So things like maybe it's not necessarily courses, but it's some sort of training and education and things like that that could be really scalable. And that's
a
because
very
it's
good
so
point.
specific.
That's a very good point. Like, you can go downstream with those kind of services, and you're seeing some firms, implement more of a membership model where they have a variety of online courses where the, for a couple $100 a month, they get access to online courses that will help give clients some insight into how they could do some of the stuff themselves. And then there's like a group training or a group coaching option that you bolt on top of that. So for a couple $100 a month, they get access to this online course module, and then they get access to you in some way, shape, or form in a group setting to go over any areas that they need a little bit more help with. And I'm not saying it lends itself well specifically to financial forensics or fraud examination. Sometimes you want a third party involved there. And sometimes these are very complex areas. So I'm not suggesting specifically with those. But there's usually always a way to model the service into something that's a little bit more repeatable. But unfortunately, in those particular areas, I don't have anything concrete.
One other quick question, and we'll try to be brief with it. And if we can't answer it in time, I do have Tel's contact information we could follow up, which was adding. You mentioned that you added advisory first and bookkeeping after. What if the clients just want bookkeeping and we don't want to do it without advisory?
And we don't want to just want to do it without it. Yeah.
I think the question is that we don't want to offer just bookkeeping. We want to offer bookkeeping plus advisory.
You have to understand who your ideal client profile is, and they might just not fit into your ideal client profile. And at that point, you would reject the client. You don't just bring clients in. Like, you're the one in control of the type of experience you want to deliver to your client, who you want to be servicing. So you don't accept clients that you don't want to be doing that kind of work for. So it's you that's in control.
Great, thank you. All right, so just to wrap it up in terms of your advisory journey and kind of some other resources, Ryan mentioned his newsletter. You can sign up for his newsletter at futurefirm.co/newsletter. Great newsletter. We were having a conversation about it before we went live here, and it's something that I get our team to be subscribed to because he's got a wealth of knowledge inside of that newsletter, as well as his Future Firm Accelerate program, and that's also on his website as well. You'll also see a link there for the FreshBooks Accountant Partner Program page, and that is where you can find out more information about collaborative accounting, which is one way to start to leverage the software to be able to do more advisory work, as well as we have a partner newsletter that goes out monthly, and that sign up is on that page as well. Thank you again, Ryan, for joining me today. Like I said earlier, we could talk for quite some time about advisory, so I'm glad that we had an opportunity to have this conversation. And I appreciate you putting in the time and sharing with all of us here today. You are an extremely wise man, and I admire the work that you're up to now and how you're really kind of extending your reach inside of Future Firm. So thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for thinking of me, and thanks to everyone who attended.